Every event you see around you today is the furthest ripple of a wave that started eddying outwards centuries ago. History is a living, breathing chain reaction of cause and effect. For the American timeline, that reaction began with a messy, desperate collision. Pre-Columbian native societies, established for thousands of years, suddenly met an influx of European colonial ambition. Survival on this unfamiliar, harsh eastern seaboard forced early settlers to adapt to an alien landscape. The Atlantic Ocean offered a massive buffer, and this isolation slowly bred a distinct society, separated from the constraints of the Old World. Decades of self-reliance bred a fierce independence. When the British Crown attempted to tighten its grip and extract more wealth, that necessity for survival boiled over into a violent, organized rebellion. To justify that treason, the colonies drafted the Declaration of Independence, building their argument on Enlightenment ideals. The concept was simple. Power comes from the consent of the governed. Putting their names in ink on this page carried the physical risk of execution. Winning the war forced the colonies to actually govern. The resulting constitution locked in a democratic framework, but getting 13 distinct states to agree required glaring contradictions. To hold the Union together, they compromised on human life, protecting the institution of slavery in the legal text right beneath we the people. The Charters of Freedom provided a volatile starting line rather than a finished solution. For the first time, the young nation had to survive the brutal reality of executing its own ideals. This map shows how the ideology of manifest destiny drove the nation to aggressively claim territory. The original 13 colonies rapidly pushed their borders westward, sweeping across the continent all the way to the Pacific coast. To keep this massive, disparate landmass from fracturing, early industrialization provided physical ties. Canals and thousands of miles of railroad track stitched the frontiers to the coastal cities. But those physical connections couldn't mask the reality of two incompatible economic systems. The North relied on wage labor and factories, while the South remained an agrarian economy dependent on enslaved human beings. This moral and economic divide stretched the constitutional framework until it snapped. A government built on compromise could no longer function when half its territory relied on a system the other half rejected. The tension finally broke in 1861, erupting into a civil war that pitted states, cities, and even families against each other. Settling this internal fracture required a devastating, unimaginable human cost. Hundreds of thousands of men died on battlefields like Gettysburg. The scale of the casualties brought the abstract political debate down to a stark, physical reality. When the Union finally secured victory, the country was forced to reckon with its original sin. The resulting amendments legally abolished slavery and redefined citizenship. The Constitution was effectively rewritten during Reconstruction. But redefining freedom on paper didn't instantly translate to the streets. The on-the-ground battle for true equality would stretch out for another century. The resolution of the Civil War triggered an explosion of industrial growth. Mechanical presses and factory machinery began to dwarf human scale, shifting the very nature of American labor. To fuel this new industrial machine, millions of immigrants traveled from across the globe, disembarking in coastal ports to supply the raw human labor the factories demanded. As populations shifted from rural farmlands into dense urban centers, massive wealth pooled into the hands of a few tycoons who controlled the steel, oil, and railways. By the mid-20th century, this manufacturing capacity turned the United States into the arsenal of democracy. Entire automotive plants pivoted to produce a continuous line of military tanks and aircraft during World War II. The volume of that industrial and military output ended American isolationism. The country stepped out of the war as a true superpower, stationed at the center of the global geopolitical stage. The post-war era brought an intense domestic economic boom that collided with global existential dread. The Berlin Wall became a concrete reality, illustrating the physical divide of the Cold War and the persistent threat of nuclear conflict. Back at home, that soaring economic prosperity clashed sharply with the unresolved racial inequalities left over from Reconstruction, sparking the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Citizens gathered in massive numbers, stretching in a sea of people all the way to the Washington Monument. They demanded that the constitutional promises of equality finally be met in practice, not just in theory. The social upheavals of the 1960s accelerated the demand for representation, a momentum that soon merged with the rapid global connectivity of the information age. These layers of progress, legal, social, and technological, ensure the definition of an American is never static. It is a concept that is perpetually forged by those who refuse to be left out of the narrative. Today, we live in a complex, hyper-connected reality that moves faster than the founders could have ever conceived. We often look back at the original charters of freedom as if they were designed to magically solve every problem. In reality, they were a first draft. The actual genius of that legal framework is that it provides the tools for a nation to constantly argue, build, fight, and course correct. It's a system designed to handle continuous friction. So, what is an American? It is someone actively participating in a 400-year unfinished chain reaction. You are the furthest ripple of that historical wave. The responsibility to harness this history and shape the direction of the next century now belongs to you.